After a wildfire, a forest doesn't just die, it begins to heal. Native plants come back, the land recovers, and the native vegetation is naturally fire resilient. It evolved here, it belongs here. Left alone, it rebuilds the kind of diverse forest that is far better equipped to survive the next fire than anything the timber industry would plant in its place. Here in Lassen County after the Dixie Fire and Sheep Fire, that's exactly what was happening. Native vegetation growing back on its own in the years following the fires. The timber industry has always operated in Lassen County, but the wildfires gave them something valuable. The ability to work around environmental protections under the cover of emergency, even 4 to 5 years after the fires. That emergency justification is still being used today all across California and will continue to be for decades to come. The truth is, aerial and ground herbicide application over vast acreage is standard practice for the timber industry and state and federal forest managers like CAL FIRE. They do it all the time. Fire didn't create this, it just made it easier. Under emergency CEQA exemptions, the environmental review process that exists to protect the land and water gets bypassed entirely. The fires handed them a shortcut, and they are exploiting it to the detriment of forests, waterways, and drinking water. They fly helicopters over thousands of acres, spraying herbicides directly onto the landscape below, blanketing recovering native forests with a cocktail of toxic chemicals designed not just to kill what grew back after the fire, but to make sure nothing grows back for years to come. You see, to the timber industry, any plant that isn't a Douglas fir or similar commercial lumber tree is considered competition, and competition needs to be eliminated before they can plant their monoculture tree farms, which are single species plantations grown for commercial harvest, a crop that, by the way, is far more likely to burn than the diverse native forest it replaced. When these logging companies spray thousands of acres with toxic herbicide cocktails, those chemicals run off down steep mountain terrain into streams, creeks, and rivers below, and because specific chemicals like Velpar DF, which contains hexazinone, are specifically designed to move into the ground and persist, they find their way down into the groundwater supply, into your drinking water, where they can stay for decades. Until I began looking into this, I assumed the California and county agencies were surely testing the water around these commercial logging projects. I mean, this is eco-friendly California, right? So who is testing the water in Lassen County? I went looking for the answer. I filed public records requests. I read agency correspondences. I tracked down inspection reports. What I found wasn't a cover-up exactly. It's far worse than that. It's a system designed to never find contamination in the first place. And if it is found, they hide it. Let's start with the regulator in charge of water quality in Lassen County, the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board, Region 6. The senior executive in charge is this guy, Ben Letton. One of the first things I did was send Lahontan an email with questions. At the time, I had no idea how any of this worked. I was just trying to understand the system. One of the things I asked was whether there were any monitoring requirements to detect herbicide contamination of groundwater and surface water when these herbicide mixtures were applied. Here's what they said. This is a written response signed by Jennifer Callahan, environmental scientist at Lahontan, dated May 9th, 2025. Quote, the Lahontan Timber Waiver does not expressly require monitoring of groundwater and surface water for herbicides and mixtures of herbicides, unquote. In plain English, the agency in charge of making sure the water in Lassen County is clean has no written requirement to monitor surface water or groundwater for herbicides being sprayed across thousands of acres in Lassen County every year. The rule doesn't require it, so it doesn't happen, and that is by design. So I thought, okay, maybe they're not required to, but maybe they do it anyway. So I asked the Lahontan Water Board to produce any water testing records tied to the logging projects in the Diamond Mountains. They have not produced a single record. No sampling before spraying starts, no monitoring during, no runoff testing after a storm, nothing. And here's the thing, nobody is testing the water. Not Lahontan, not the timber companies, and if they do test, they're certainly not going to be giving the results to anyone. What about the Lassen Agricultural Department? Definitely not. But aren't they the ones issuing the permits for the herbicides? Yeah, but they don't inspect. In fact, they refuse to even step foot on these monster logging operations. They don't monitor or test the water. They do nothing except issue the permit and forget about it. What about the Honey Lake Resource Conservation District? They fund a lot of these projects, and they're the ones responsible for bypassing the environmental controls. Surely they test the water. Nope. What about the Lassen Fire Safe Council? They spray thousands of acres of forest with herbicides. They get millions and millions of dollars a year in taxpayer grants. Surely they take some of that money and they test the water around some of the projects that they do, right? I mean, they have to. Why wouldn't they? I mean, they claim to be community-based in a quote-unquote grassroots organization, allegedly. No, definitely not. No way. What about the Department of Pesticide Regulation under Director Karen Morrison? I mean, we're talking across California, we're talking millions of acres of herbicide application. Surely they're testing or monitoring the water around these operations, right? No, definitely not. And in fact, I'm pretty sure Karen Morrison and the DPR are covering this up. What about CAL FIRE? I mean, CAL FIRE they're in charge of managing the forests here in California. You know, there's Chief Kern up here in Lassen County. You know, they oversee a lot of these projects. You know, they do provide the funding to these private logging companies, millions of dollars every year, to Sierra Pacific Industries and WM Beatty right here in Lassen. They have to be. Absolutely, how could they not test or monitor the water runoff from these projects? They are, right? Yeah, nope. Nobody. Not a single agency or operator is testing the water in Lassen County around these massive, multi-thousand acre herbicide applications in sensitive mountain watersheds. This is not an oversight, it's on purpose, and it's by design. Because if they tested the water, they would find what I found when I began testing the water just downstream from these logging projects. And what I found was toxic herbicide runoff. How does this happen? How does this happen on such a large scale? How do they get away with it? They get away with it for a few reasons. First, most people, including myself before this investigation, they don't even know that toxic herbicides are being sprayed in forests for timber harvest. It's not something they advertise for obvious reasons. Second, these projects are in remote, difficult to access areas. They never post signs telling you or warning you that they're doing it. So even if you make it out there, you have no idea. Third, most people, even if they do suspect something, assume it's being done responsibly. They trust the system, which is a horrible idea. But let's just say a neighboring property owner does suspect herbicide contamination on their land. They go down to the Lassen Agricultural Department and they ask, "What's being sprayed up there?" Commissioner Gary Fensler will tell them he has no idea, even though he's the one issuing the permits. Yeah. And if you ask to see those permits, which you have the right to see, they're public records, it is the law, even if Mr. Fensler disagrees. Gary Fensler will tell you he can't give them to you, that he has to check with the Board of Supervisors before he can. The next step after Gary Fensler violates the California Public Records Act and refuses to give you any information or permits on what herbicides could be in your drinking water, you then submit a written California Public Records Act request for the record to show that you're trying to get this information. But what happens next? Gary Fensler is still going to refuse to provide the records whether it's written or not, and then he's going to refer your written request to the Lassen County attorney, Michelle Nassis, who, by the way, is employed by a private law firm in Redding, and her job is to make sure that you don't get the records you need to find out what herbicides could be in your drinking water. I know it sounds crazy, but Lassen County is paying a private law firm to conceal and obstruct public records requests. So once Michelle Nassis gets a hold of the public records request, the first thing she's going to do is tell you that the permits can't be provided because they aren't computerized in the system, which is a lie. And even if you get past all of that, decide to test the water yourself, you first have to know what to test for. And because the ag department won't give you the permits, it's difficult to find out what you need to be testing for. The logging companies have about 10 different chemicals they use. Each sample you take, whether it's water sample or soil sample, can cost $200 to $300 per chemical. So do the math. This adds up to thousands of dollars that could have been saved if Gary Fensler and Lassen County weren't hiding the records. So the chances of anybody getting to the bottom of any of this is extremely low. And that, my friends, is exactly how they want it. And as we'll cover in detail in future videos, even if you find a lab that tests for these chemicals, which is extremely difficult, and you submit these lab results with a formal complaint to the Lassen Ag Department, Lassen County will work with the logging company to cover up the contamination.